The VP's daughter mocked my thrift store ring during a staff meeting. I said nothing. 2 hours later, a billionaire client saw it and went white. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I said my father's name. He stood. "Then they have no idea who you are." I should have said something. I should have defended myself when Leela Lang, with her smug smile and expensive taste, made her sarcastic little remark about my ring. But I didn't. I just sat there in the meeting room, the sharp, cutting words sinking into me like a blade, but I let them pass. Everyone else at the table pretended to be busy with their notes or their Zoom calendars, like nothing had happened. But I felt it. I felt the shift in the room, even if no one else did. It was just another one of Leela's antics, after all. Her words, though, kept echoing in my head. "Thrift store chick," she had said. "Did Goodwill start carrying medieval weaponry?" Her laugh followed, a sound that felt too loud, too sharp for a room filled with executives and clients. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just turned my gaze down to my ring, the simple, old gold band that had once been my father's, then his father's before him. It had worn edges, a faint imprint of something intricate that time had worn away. Leela didn't understand that the ring wasn't some accessory to me. It wasn't a statement piece or a way to get attention. It was a reminder, a promise. The kind of thing you wear every day, never taking it off. Even when you're curled up on a hospice cot, waiting for your father to die, except he never did. Not yet, anyway. I glanced at the clock. Elias Rourke was due in 2 hours. The firm's biggest client, the man who could make or break us, and someone who would recognize that ring. The same man who would understand the significance of it, the way Leela never would. The meeting went on, with budgets and projections being discussed, but the sting of Leela's words lingered in the air. I didn't speak up. I didn't need to. My silence was enough. Leela, in her knockoff Balenciaga blazer and inherited job title, couldn't have known what she'd just triggered. But that ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a reminder of everything I had to keep buried, everything I had to survive, everything that had made me who I was. And as I sat there, listening to the VP's voice drone on about quarterly growth projections, I knew something was about to change. Not for the better, but for something real. And when Elias Rourke walked into that room, the joke about my ring wouldn't just be funny anymore. It was going to be a prophecy. I didn't know it then, but that moment, Leela's mocking words, the laughter that followed, would be the spark. The start of everything that was about to unfold. I didn't speak then, and I wasn't going to speak now. But I would be heard. And Leela, she would learn what it meant to underestimate me. I sat at my desk. The hum of the fluorescent lights above almost deafening in the silence of the office. My fingers rested lightly on the keyboard, but my mind was miles away. Leela's words kept circling in my head. Thrift store chick. Siki. Did Goodwill start carrying medieval weaponry? The office was a maze of glass walls, chrome furniture, and the scent of stale coffee. The quiet buzzing of emails and clicking of keyboards were the only sounds that accompanied me as I tried to push the memory of Leela's taunts out of my head. It was the same every day. I came in early, did my work with precision, and left before anyone could notice me. I was just another cog in the machine, invisible, quiet, but dependable. The kind of employee you only noticed when something went wrong. When the numbers didn't add up and needed fixing. No one knew my name outside the spreadsheet I maintained for the firm. But my father's name. That was another matter entirely. I didn't wear the ring to get attention. It wasn't for decoration. It was a reminder. My father, Edmund Acheson, had taught me that. He had a way of looking at the world, a way of knowing that everything, every interaction, every business deal, had weight. Not everyone could see it, but I'd learned how. I learned that the quietest moments often held the most power. And the ring, simple as it seemed, was a connection to that. It had been his, passed down from his father, worn through the years as a symbol of a promise he made to me long before he died. Stay invisible until you don't. That was how he said it. He believed that in this world, you had to wait. You had to bide your time and play the long game. I could still hear his voice in my head, even now. The firm wasn't my battlefield. Not yet. But it would be. And when it was, they'd remember me. I checked the time. Elias Rourke was due to arrive in less than an hour. The firm's biggest client. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. I had been watching him for years, his silent power, his precise decisions, his ability to move the world without ever making a sound. He wasn't a regular client, he was a legacy. And I knew he would see that ring. And when he did, everything would change. The office buzzed as people shifted into their roles for the meeting. I could hear snippets of conversations from the other side of the floor. But I kept my eyes on the screen in front of me. Just another day in the life of someone who no one ever noticed, except when it mattered. Leela passed by, her steps clicking on the polished marble floor. Her voice was loud, too loud for the office. "I'm sorry, did I miss the memo? Is it thrift store day?" She laughed too loudly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her presence made me feel like a ghost in the room. Like she was the sun, and I was just a shadow. But shadows don't make waves. Shadows don't stand up. I watched her disappear down the hall, and I knew she wasn't the one I had to worry about. Leela. She was just noise. The real game had already begun. I took a deep breath and adjusted the ring on my finger. The weight of it felt heavier now, not from the gold, but from the legacy it represented. I had worn it every day for the past 11 years, never taking it off. Not for a moment. Not even during the weeks I spent at my father's side, watching him fade away on a hospice cot. And now, here I was, in the midst of this office full of people who had no idea who I was, or who I was about to become. Elias Rourke would be here soon. And when he saw that ring, he'd know. And so would they all. The firm had built its success on foundations that were buried, forgotten, erased. But I wasn't here to let them forget anymore. The elevator dinged, and I looked up just in time to see Elias Rourke step off. The room fell silent as his presence filled the space. No one spoke. No one dared to. He didn't need to announce himself. He was power in its purest form. I rose from my seat, feeling the familiar weight of the ring on my finger. The same ring my father had worn for decades, a silent symbol of his influence. As I walked toward the conference room, I saw Elias glance in my direction. His gaze caught on my hand for just a moment. Then, it was gone, and he entered the room without a word. I stood at the threshold for a moment, knowing what was coming. The moment when everything would change. Leela's voice cut through the quiet hum of the office like a knife, sharp and unnecessary. I had just sat down at my desk, trying to focus on the spreadsheet in front of me, when I heard her laugh echoing across the room. It was too loud, too fake. She had just finished another one of her ridiculous rants about some new business trend she'd read about on a blog, completely detached from reality. But that didn't stop her from delivering it, like she was the authority. Are we really doing that now? Leela's voice carried as she walked by my desk, her high heels clicking against the polished floors. Her words weren't aimed at me, but I knew she was talking about my ring. I had expected this, of course. From the moment I'd walked into the office wearing it, I knew someone would comment. It had always been a point of curiosity among the few who even noticed it. Leela, in her usual over-the-top fashion, had decided it would be her turn to mock. You seriously wear that thing? Leela continued, leaning in, as if I could somehow respond. Her voice dripped with the kind of venom I had learned to ignore over the years. You could have at least polished it. It's giving thrift store chick. I didn't respond. I wouldn't. The last thing I wanted was to give her any more attention. But she wasn't done. She tossed her hair back and added, louder than necessary, is that brass? Or is Goodwill now selling medieval weaponry? The room was silent for a moment, everyone looking down at their phones or pretending to concentrate on their laptops. I could feel their eyes flicking up to watch the scene unfold. But I kept my gaze focused straight ahead, my fingers still lightly resting on the keyboard. Isn't it cute? Leela laughed, her eyes scanning the room for confirmation, her shoulders lifting in an exaggerated shrug. I mean, it's definitely Av look. The weight of her words hit me, but I kept my expression neutral. I wasn't going to react. Not here. Not now. What Leela didn't know, what no one in this office could understand, was that the ring wasn't just some cheap accessory I had picked up at a yard sale. It was a part of me. It had been my father's, passed down to me as a reminder of what was important. What he had built. The history it carried was far more valuable than anything Leela could ever buy with her father's money. Leela had no idea what the ring symbolized. She thought it was just a piece of old jewelry, something to laugh about. But that ring, simple, worn, and understated, was a symbol of a promise my father had made to me, years ago, when I was just a child. The promise was never about wealth or status. It was about legacy. It was about knowing when to stay invisible, and when to make yourself known. He had taught me that. My father had built his empire quietly, never asking for the spotlight, but always pulling the strings behind the scenes. I had learned how to watch, how to listen, and how to wait. I knew better than to react to Leela. She was just noise. Her words, like her presence, were nothing more than distractions. It was the quiet ones who mattered. The ones who knew how to play the game without ever stepping into the spotlight. That was my father's way, and it was mine too. But that didn't mean I would stay quiet forever. The office buzzed back to life after Leela's comment. But I could feel the weight of her words lingering in the air. I had kept my head down, kept my calm, but the damage had been done. Leela didn't understand the game she was playing. She thought she could get by on charm, on connections, on her father's last name. But I wasn't playing that game. I wasn't here to prove anything to her. I glanced at the clock. Elias Rourke was due in an hour. I had been waiting for this moment for years, and now it was almost here. I knew what would happen when he saw my ring. He would understand. And when that moment came, the balance of power would shift. Not because of anything I did, but because of who I was. I wasn't just another employee. I wasn't just someone who showed up every day, did their job, and left. I was a son. And that meant something. The meeting was about to start, and I was about to make my move. But first, I had to let the noise fade. Let the taunts and the mockery fall away. In a few short minutes, everything would change. Leela wouldn't even see it coming. The door to the conference room opened with a soft click, and a hush fell over the office. Everyone straightened in their chairs, hands folding into laps, eyes flicking to the door. I didn't have to look up to know who had entered. The air shifted. It always did when Elias Rourke walked into a room. He was tall, like an old athlete who never quite lost the edge. His movements were deliberate, measured, each step purposeful. His suit was made of fabric that didn't need to shout about its quality, charcoal gray and perfectly fitted, with a black overcoat draped carefully over one arm. There was no small talk when he arrived, no pleasantries. He just moved in, and the room adjusted to him. I stayed where I was, my hands folded in front of me. I didn't rise, didn't make a show of greeting him. It wasn't necessary. Elias Rourke wasn't someone you greeted with the same politeness you reserved for everyone else. He was something else entirely. He didn't need introductions. Everyone knew who he was. And everyone respected the silence he commanded. As I stood there in the corner of the room, quietly watching him, I noticed how the others shifted in their seats. They pretended to focus on their documents or to adjust their glasses, but their eyes kept darting to him. No one was brave enough to approach, to say something they didn't have to. And then it happened. Elias stopped, just like that, in the middle of the room. His feet planted on the ground, as if something had caught his attention. His eyes dropped to my hand. For the briefest moment, time stopped. I could feel the shift. His gaze wasn't just on the ring, it was on me. The room held its breath. No one dared speak, not even the VP, who was usually so eager to impress. The others, Leela, her father, the senior managers, none of them seemed to know what was happening. But they could feel it too. The tension was thick, crackling in the air like static. "Where did you get that?" Elias's voice was low, but there was an edge to it. The kind of edge that could make even the most seasoned executive pause. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I simply looked at him, letting the silence settle between us. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. "My father's name," I replied calmly. The words hung in the air between us, more powerful than I ever expected them to be. My father's name. The name that had been buried, forgotten, until this very moment. Elias didn't respond immediately. He just stared at me. His eyes flicked from the ring to my face, as if searching for something he wasn't sure he'd find. I could see the moment it clicked for him. It was in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his posture stiffened. The memories flooded back. The name. The legacy. The years of quiet power. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This was what I had been waiting for. What I had known was coming. Elias took a slow step forward, his hand moving slightly as if to reach out, but pulling back at the last moment. I didn't move. Didn't make the mistake of trying to understand what he was thinking. I already knew what he was remembering, and I wasn't going to feed it to him. The words came again, almost a whisper this time. Your father, Edmund Aitson. I gave a small nod. The name was out there now, and with it came the weight of everything my father had built. The world didn't forget, no matter how hard it tried. His expression hardened. There was no more warmth in his gaze, only cold, calculating knowledge. The kind of knowledge that only comes with years spent in the shadows, understanding how power truly works. I should have known. Elias muttered under his breath, almost to himself. He was still looking at me, but his mind was elsewhere, racing through the decades, through the deals, the secrets. The moment passed quickly, but the air in the room had shifted. Something had changed. The executives, the staff, they were still pretending to go about their business. But now I could see it in their eyes. The realization had dawned. They knew something had just happened, something they hadn't expected. Elias turned and started to walk toward the conference table, but not before he glanced at me once more. I could feel his gaze on me even as he walked past. There was a faint nod, a recognition that held more than I cared to admit. It was a silent acknowledgement that something had just begun, something none of them could stop now. I followed him into the room, my footsteps echoing quietly behind him. As I took my seat, I could feel Leela's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. She was still trying to make sense of what had just happened, her mind racing to catch up. Elias took his place at the head of the table, and the meeting began, but my mind wasn't on the numbers or the projections. It was on that moment, on the power shift that had just occurred, and the quiet understanding that had passed between Elias and me. They didn't know who I was, but Elias did, and that was all that mattered. The tension in the room was palpable as the meeting dragged on. I sat in my usual spot, a little to the side, my clipboard resting on my lap, more as armor than anything else. The numbers on the projection screen blurred together, a mishmash of pie charts and figures that no one really cared about. They were talking, but no one was listening. Not really. Not when Elias Rourke was in the room. Leela was still squirming in her seat, trying to pretend she wasn't rattled by what had happened earlier. I could tell she was uncomfortable, but she was doing her best to mask it with her usual bravado. She fiddled with her iPad, tapping through slides she probably couldn't even explain if she were asked. The VP, Richard Lang, was equally distracted, his gaze shifting between the PowerPoint and the clock, his mind undoubtedly racing. He hadn't said much since Elias arrived, and that suited me just fine. The more they stayed quiet, the more I could control the pace. Elias sat at the far end of the table, watching everything unfold with the kind of stillness that made even the most seasoned executives nervous. His eyes weren't on the presentation, though. They were on me. I could feel his gaze every time I shifted in my seat, every time I adjusted my position. I kept my hands folded in front of me, trying to maintain my composure, but inside, I was feeling a storm build. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of meaningless corporate chatter, Elias broke the silence. Enough, he said, his voice smooth but firm. It was a command, not a suggestion. Everyone in the room froze, but no one spoke. Not even Richard Lang, whose mouth hung slightly open, as though unsure if he had permission to continue. Elias didn't wait for anyone to respond. He simply stood and moved toward me. The room seemed to shrink as he approached. Every step he took deliberate, measured. His eyes never left mine. As he stopped next to my chair, I could feel my pulse quicken. He was close now, too close, but I didn't move. I stayed still, letting him have his moment. His presence was commanding, and I knew he wasn't used to being ignored. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. I had waited years for this moment, and now it was finally here. Elias didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking down at my hand. His eyes traced the contours of the ring, and I could see the recognition in his face. The sudden understanding of what he had just stumbled upon. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping low, only loud enough for me to hear. "Where did you get that ring?" I didn't flinch, I didn't hesitate. I simply said, "My father's name." There was a pause. A long stretch of silence, where I could almost hear the gears in his head turning. His gaze flicked between the ring and my face, and for a moment, I thought he might say something more. But he didn't. Instead, his expression shifted, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Recognition, yes. But also something deeper. Something dangerous. He took a step back, his posture straightening, but he didn't look away from me. "Edmund Axon," he muttered under his breath. It was more to himself than to anyone else. I watched him process the information, his mind racing. Elias had known my father. They had been in the same circles, done business together years ago. But it wasn't something that was widely known. My father had kept to the shadows, working quietly behind the scenes, making his influence felt, without ever revealing himself. But now, with a single statement, everything was changing. For the first time, I saw a crack in Elias's composed exterior. His hands clenched, and his jaw tightened, as if he were holding back a wave of emotion. But just as quickly as it appeared, the storm passed, and he regained his usual calm. He straightened, his gaze flicking across the room. The executives were all watching now, their attention fully on him. Even Leela had stopped pretending to check her phone. But it wasn't me they were looking at. They were looking at Elias. And I could see the shift in their faces. They didn't know what had just happened, but they felt it. Without missing a beat, Elias addressed the room, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "This meeting is over," he said simply. No one moved. Richard Lang seemed to choke on his words, his mouth opening and closing, as if trying to say something that wasn't coming out. But Elias wasn't interested in waiting for his approval. He didn't need to. He turned to me, his gaze softening for a moment, then nodded. "We'll speak soon," he said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. It wasn't a question, it was a promise. And then, just as quickly as he had arrived, he was gone. The room was left in stunned silence. And I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had known this moment would come, but now that it had happened, it felt almost surreal. Leela was the first to recover, her voice shaking as she whispered to the person sitting next to her. "What just happened?" But no one answered her. No one had the answers. Not yet. I stood, gathering my things slowly, deliberately. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, but I didn't look up. I didn't need to. The game had just changed, and no one in that room knew it yet, not even Elias. The room didn't go back to normal after Elias left. There was no immediate shift back to the usual corporate chatter. Instead, an eerie quiet hung over the office, like the calm after a storm. People began to shuffle, trying to act like nothing had happened. But I could feel it, an undercurrent of tension rippling through the air. Leela was the first to break the silence, her voice too high-pitched, too brittle. What was that about? Why did he leave? She looked around the room, expecting someone to answer, but no one spoke. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. She wasn't the one who mattered. I was the one who had made the impact today, and it wasn't going to be forgotten. I gathered my things slowly, my movements deliberate as I stood up from my seat. My eyes flicked briefly to the projection screen, still showing the ongoing presentation that no one was paying attention to. The words blurred together, as the numbers on the slide felt irrelevant in the face of everything that had just happened. Richard Lang was sitting at the head of the table, his face drained of color. He had been a silent observer since Elias's abrupt departure, his mind racing to process what had just unfolded. He looked up at me as I moved toward the door, his mouth opening, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. I didn't wait for him. I didn't need to. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I felt the weight of it, the shift in the power dynamic. I wasn't just the quiet worker anymore. I was someone they had to reckon with. The lights overhead flickered slightly, casting sharp shadows on the walls. The air felt heavy, and the office, usually buzzing with the hum of day-to-day business, now felt like a place on the verge of unraveling. I walked down the corridor, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. I didn't need to look back to know they were watching me. They were trying to make sense of what had just happened, of who I really was. But it didn't matter. The pieces had already been set into motion. I had a moment of quiet reflection as I passed the conference room, where Elias had just been. His presence still lingered in the air, thick and palpable, like a storm cloud waiting to break. He'd seen me, really seen me, in a way no one else in that room had. I stopped in front of the elevator and pressed the button. It was a slow wait, the seconds dragging by as my mind raced. The elevator doors finally opened, and I stepped inside. As they closed behind me, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It wasn't fear. It was relief. The quiet had always been my ally, but now, I could feel the balance of power shifting, tilting in my favor. I wasn't going to let them forget me. I wasn't going to let them forget who I was. By the time I reached my office floor, I had already made my decision. I wasn't here to stay invisible. I was here to make them remember the price of forgetting. The door to my office opened with a soft click, and I walked in, immediately greeted by the sight of my desk. The papers on my desk were scattered, but the calmness of my space felt grounding. I set my bag down and took a seat. My hands moved to the keyboard, but my mind wasn't on the work in front of me. It was already on what came next. I didn't need to react to what had just happened. Elias Rourke had given me something far more valuable than I expected, a chance. A chance to rewrite the rules, to take back the power that had been buried for so long. I opened my email, scanned the subject lines, and then clicked on the encrypted message that had arrived earlier that morning. It was a simple line of text, but it carried weight. Coordinates confirmed. Your time has come. I didn't have to open the attachment. I already knew what it meant. It was time to call in the favor. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the ring on my finger. The same one that had been mocked. The same one that had started this chain of events. My father had built his empire in the shadows, but now I was stepping into the light. And I wasn't going to let anyone forget what they owed him. Or what they owed me. The phone on my desk buzzed with an incoming call. And for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I knew exactly who it was before I even glanced at the screen. Elias Rourke. The name flashed across the display, and my stomach tightened. He hadn't called yet, but I knew what was coming. This wasn't just a business call. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the real conversation. I picked up the phone, my fingers brushing the smooth surface as I pressed it to my ear. Hello. Hailey. Elias's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made the air feel charged. We need to talk. His words hit me like a freight train, but I kept my tone steady. About. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear him weighing his words. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more deliberate. About what happened earlier, and about what comes next. I felt a surge of anticipation, my pulse quickening. This was it. The turning point. Everything I had been working toward had led to this moment. The last few days had been a whirlwind, but now it felt like the storm was finally reaching its peak. I'm listening, I said, leaning back in my chair, letting the words sink in. I've been watching you for a long time, Hailey, Elias said, his tone shifting to something more thoughtful. Your father wasn't just a financier. He was a ghost in the system. No one knew what he was really doing behind the scenes, but I did. And I know what you've inherited. It's not just the ring. It's the legacy. I closed my eyes, a chill running down my spine. There it was. The truth that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. My father's legacy wasn't just about money or power. It was about control, the kind of control that had shaped everything around us without anyone noticing. Until now. I didn't want to pull you into this. Elias continued, his voice quieter now. But you're already here. And I think you've known for a while that it's time to stop hiding. My mind raced as I processed his words. It wasn't just about the firm. It wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about something much bigger. Something that went beyond the office walls and the corporate games. I'm not here for a power grab, Elias, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. I'm here for the truth. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost feel him nodding, as if he understood exactly what I meant. Good. Because that's what I'm offering. The truth. The real story behind your father's involvement with this company, and everything that was buried. He exhaled, the sound almost like a sigh. It's time for you to step into the light, Hailey. You've been in the shadows long enough. My hand tightened around the phone, my heart racing. It was happening. The game was changing, and it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. About the lies, the corruption, the secrets that had been hidden for far too long. "I'll be there," I said, my voice firm. "When?" "Tomorrow," Elias replied without hesitation. "The board meeting." "You'll need to be there. It's time to end this." I didn't need any more details. I knew what this meant. Tomorrow would be the day everything changed. Tomorrow, the firm would finally realize what they had been hiding all along. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting everything sink in. The quiet buzz of the office felt distant now, almost irrelevant. Tomorrow, I would walk into that room, and everything would come crashing down. I looked down at the ring on my finger again, its weight suddenly heavier than ever before. It wasn't just a reminder of my father's legacy anymore. It was the key to unlocking everything he had left behind. The ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of what was coming, a storm that would reshape everything. I stood up, walking over to the window. The city sprawled out before me, the lights flickering in the distance. The world seemed so small from here. But I knew tomorrow it would all feel much larger. Tomorrow, I would step into the room and claim what was rightfully mine. The truth would come out, and there would be no going back. The office, the lies, the fake smiles, they wouldn't matter anymore. This was the beginning of something bigger. The beginning of the end for all of them. Tomorrow, everything would change. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered it, sterile, polished. Too pristine to be anything but a monument to corporate greed. The long mahogany table stretched across the room, gleaming under the bright, artificial lights. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, clashing with the cold, metallic sharpness of the glass walls. I stood just outside, taking a moment to breathe. My hands were steady, my heart calm, but there was a sense of quiet power growing inside me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when everything that had been buried would rise to the surface. I adjusted the collar of my jacket and stepped into the room. The hush that followed my entrance was palpable. They all turned, eyes flicking toward me, a mix of surprise and unease. Leela was sitting at the far end, her face pale, her usual bravado gone. Richard Lang was visibly sweating, his posture stiff, as if he could already sense that everything was slipping through his fingers. The others, senior executives, board members, the people who thought they ran this company, watched with bated breath. I didn't need to say anything yet. The silence was enough. Elias Rourke was already sitting at the head of the table, his presence an unspoken command. He didn't need to rise, didn't need to say a word. Just the fact that he was here was a statement in itself. His eyes met mine, and in that brief moment I knew. He wasn't just here for business. He was here for this. "Hailey," he said, his voice deep and steady, breaking the silence. "It's time." I nodded. This was the moment I had been preparing for. The ring on my finger, the quiet years of observation, the lessons learned from my father. All of it had led to this point. Leela shifted in her seat, glancing nervously at the others. Her eyes were wide, confused, as if she hadn't yet understood the gravity of what was happening. But Richard Lang, he was different. His hands were trembling, and he couldn't stop wiping his forehead, trying to control the panic rising in him. "Richard," I began, my voice calm, carrying across the room. You've built your career on lies. On nepotism. On ignoring the very foundation of this company's success. My father gave everything to keep this firm alive. And you? I paused, watching him squirm. You let it rot from the inside. His eyes darted toward the other board members, searching for support, but none came. They were all watching him now. Their expressions a mix of shock and realization. I stepped closer to the table, my movements deliberate. You thought you could erase my father's legacy. You thought you could control the narrative, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Leela's voice broke through, shaky and desperate. What are you talking about? She asked, her hands gripping the edge of the table. This is insane. You can't just. I turned to her, cutting her off with a glance. You have no idea what's happening, do you? I asked, my tone icy. This isn't a game anymore, Leela. This is real. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat when Elias raised a hand. The room fell silent again. Elias Rourke's voice carried the weight of authority as he addressed the room. Hailey is right. The foundation of this company was built on the quiet power of Edmund Hson. A power that was never acknowledged, never rewarded. But it's time for that to change. Richard Lang looked at him, disbelief painted across his face. You can't be serious. You're siding with her. Elias didn't even look at him. I'm siding with what's right. I glanced around the room, making sure everyone understood. This company owes everything to my father. His name isn't something to be mocked, Leela, I added, the words dripping with cold finality. It's something you'll never understand. You and your father are nothing but parasites feeding off what others built. Richard Lang's face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The truth had finally caught up with him. He had spent years pretending he was in control, but all along, the real power had been in the shadows. My father's legacy had never gone anywhere. It had just been waiting for the right moment to resurface. I've already made the decision, Elias continued, his voice calm. Your position here is no longer tenable, Richard. There was no protest. No attempt to deny it. Richard Lang's empire was crumbling in real time. The foundation he had relied on was slipping from beneath him. I turned my gaze back to the room, watching as the realization spread across the faces of the remaining board members. There was no turning back now. Hailey, Elias said again, his eyes steady on me. Would you like to address the board? I didn't hesitate. This was my moment, the culmination of everything I had worked for. Yes, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. It's time for the truth to be heard. I reached into my bag and pulled out a simple black velvet box. I opened it slowly, letting the moment hang in the air as I placed the ring inside. The room fell into a stunned silence. This ring isn't just a symbol of my father's legacy, I said, my voice steady. It's the key to everything. This company's past, its future, it all ties back to this. I slid the box across the table, toward the founder, Malcolm Brandt, whose eyes were wide now, filled with something between awe and regret. Take a good look at it. I continued. Because this is what you've all forgotten. This is the truth you've been running from. I stood up, straightening my jacket. I'm done here, I said quietly. You don't deserve the legacy you've inherited. As I turned to leave, I heard Malcolm Brandt's voice behind me. Hailey, wait. I paused at the door, my hand resting on the handle. I looked over my shoulder. What now? I asked, my tone flat. He seemed to hesitate before speaking, his voice barely a whisper. Was this always the plan? I didn't answer right away. I just gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. No. The plan was to see if you deserved the legacy you inherited. I paused, then added, you failed. And with that, I walked out of the room. The door closed behind me, and the office fell silent. But I knew things had already changed. The pieces were in motion, and there was no stopping them now. As I walked down the hallway, the weight of the ring on my finger felt lighter. I had come for the truth, and I had taken it back. The rest was just noise